President Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping are set to meet one-on-one during next week's APEC summit in San Francisco. This is Xi's first visit to the United States since 2017. The talks come amid rising tensions between the world's two largest economies. And of course, this meeting follows a mixed week for President Biden. Democrats won big on Election Day, but new CBS News polling shows him trailing former President Donald Trump in a hypothetical rematch in some key states. Our panel is joining us now to weigh in on this week's political news. Ashley Etienne is a CBS News political contributor and former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris and former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. And Leslie Sanchez is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. Nice to see you, ladies.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, Ashley, I'm going to start with you. Polling from the New York Times as well also shows Trump ahead in several key swing states. But then, of course, you know, the Democrats did really well in terms of the election and also Democratic-related issues, I should say, not just Democrats. So the question is kind of, how are you interpreting the outcome of Tuesday's elections coupled with the polls? Is it about issues that Democrats care about are winning, but President Biden is facing challenges? Is there a disconnect?
Here's the thing. I mean, the one thing we learned coming out of Tuesday is you can't trust the polls. And it further proves the point. We've been learning that dating back to 2018 when Democrats started outperforming these polls and defying the polls. Ever since Donald Trump showed up on the political stage. Here's the other thing. I mean, there's all this talk and these questions about whether or not Joe Biden's a drag on the Democratic ticket. And here's the reality. He's had the best performance of any president going into a reelection. And from the midterms to the off years, the best performance in the past 20 years he's had. So I think we again, I keep saying this, we're over investing in these polls. They're not a depiction of what's happening out in the country. It's not a depiction of voter sentiment. Here in the Beltway, we continue to obsess about this top lines when the reality is it doesn't bear out in the actual voting. And that's all that actually matters.
Is there a possibility that people like Democratic positions on some key topics, but they're not so crazy about Biden?
No, I just said that Biden is not an actual drag. I'll give you a good example of that. In Kentucky, the Republican Party invested $30 million in trying to tie Governor Beshear to Joe Biden, and it didn't work. He won in a state that Donald Trump won by double digits. Beshear did, who's a Democrat. So that further proves the point that Joe Biden is not a drag on the Democratic ticket. Here's what I'm really sensing is that voters don't want what the Republicans are offering. 70% of their voters want an alternative to Donald Trump. After election, voters are proving that they don't want the MAGA agenda. Women want their rights. They don't want their rights reversed. People aren't into the woke agenda, not even Republican voters. So that's really my take away from this last election. It's scary for the Republicans. I think it's bolstering Democrats' arguments and confidence in Joe Biden as well as our agenda.
Leslie, what is your take? I mean, I don't know if you both had a chance to see Tony DeCoppel's story this week where he went to a football game, a Philadelphia Eagles football game, and he talked to people there in Philly, which is always an interesting microcosm of the country because you get a lot of people from all over Pennsylvania that are Phillies fans. And the main theme of what he uncovered is that both Republicans and Democrats are disillusioned by their potential party leaders, in this case, clearly President Biden and potentially former President Trump. They don't see it as a choice that they want to make on either men.
Sure, unless they're forced to, right? So I think there's a couple of things to respond to what Ashley was saying, and some things I agree upon. If you look at the polls, you know, as someone who's in the field all the time, they may not indicate specifically where the problem is, but a poll is like a fever. It's telling you that there is something there, and so you have to go deeper to investigate what that is. Is it the issue of the president's age? Is it the issue of border security and failure on his promises, and and an unfavorable president, the economy, gas prices? I mean, the list goes on. When you dive deeper into those swing state issues, you hear a lot of common ground around the economy and around wanting another choice. And I would argue that's also on the Republican side of the ticket. You're talking about Kentucky. That's a state Republicans have won in the presidential election the last 5 cycles. So Republicans aren't worried about, a red state like Kentucky, but they do look at the caliber of the candidates and what that means. And there were not strong gubernatorial candidates, Republicans would argue, in those states. So there's work on both sides of the aisle. But Donald Trump, looking at what he did during the presidential debate, for example, he's discounting these GOP debates where people are really trying to focus on alternatives and instead swinging very hard on areas like Hialeah, Miami-Dade, the Cuban American community that have bolstered his campaign in the past. And one line I heard from a Republican down in Miami was like, we like DeSantis, but we adore Trump. And so no matter how much we try to move away from that, these figures at the top of the ticket are really going to be moving that fever pitch back and forth for the next year.
So what's your take on the debates, whether or not, they are worthwhile? Forget about whether or not, the former president shows up. If people are hungry for some sort of alternative, well, they got a bunch of them on stage, but they still don't seem to be that interested, Leslie.
I think they want to see what that alternative looks like, what that backbench looks like. I mean, if you think about this no labels party, this third party alternative that's been getting a lot of buzz on both sides of the aisle, people are floating now, Manchin's name up there with Mitt Romney and filing paperwork, hoping that they move to be the top of that ticket. The reason is they want to find an alternative voice that's somewhere in the middle. And I would argue it also allows people to determine if they can take a national stage. Are they ready? What does that backbench look like? Nikki Haley's done incredibly well, raised tremendous amount of money, raised her profile as an independent candidate who can stand on her own. DeSantis has done well. And those are the two that we saw at the top of the ticket that have consistently performed well. That becomes incredibly important in managing this media, managing a national campaign. And I'm sure Ashley could speak to that too. It is no small feat to organize a national campaign. And they're trying to see if they can raise the money to do so. So anything could happen going into next year. Republicans want to see what their options are.
So, Ashley, speaking of national campaigns, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin is not seeking re-election as a United States Senator in the very red state of West Virginia, where Donald Trump won both times he ran for president there. But he's talking about traveling through the country and hearing from Americans. So a lot of people
bringing the middle together.
Bringing the middle together. But
right.
If you've got Republicans that are running under the Republican banner who are not getting any traction, and if this is speculating that if Manchin decides to offer himself up for the presidency in a third party capacity, I mean, what is he seeing that we're not seeing? I mean, is there, and this is, I guess, a question for both of you, because a third party candidate would siphon votes away from both of those candidates.
Both, if he's the third party candidate,
right?
Yeah.
So I mean, really quickly, what do you both think about this? Ashley, you first.
Well, I mean, I think Biden should take an LBJ approach, which is offer the guy an ambassadorship, bring him into the tent, and offer him an ambassadorship. I don't think third parties are is much of a threat to Joe Biden. I don't think it's much of a threat even to the Republican Party. Especially at this point. I mean, the greatest challenge is getting on the ballot. But I don't think it's much of a threat.
Ashley, but wouldn't Hillary Clinton say Jill Stein was part of the reason why I was not able to get it over the finish line back in 2016?
Well, I think Hillary Clinton would say there's a lot of factors of why she didn't get over the finish line. I think she would probably primarily point to Russian interference in that election. But I will say, I mean, I love Hillary Clinton, but she's no Joe Biden at this point. I mean, Joe Biden has an incredible bipartisan record. Again, as I mentioned, he's outperformed any other president at this point going into his general election. I think he's the most underestimated politician in modern history. And I think we need to stop. We need to give Joe Biden some credit. If we're not going to hold Republicans accountable for losing 4 cycles under Donald Trump, we need to finally give Joe Biden some credit.
Leslie, real quick, your thought.
It's going to be an interesting comparison, seeing Manchin out on the field doing campaign efforts, listening to people, and you still have a campaign that people remember of Joe Biden, where he was pretty much campaigning from his basement. I mean, just the alternative on the Democratic side is going to be stark. And it just shows that people are hungry for other options, I would say, on both sides of the aisle.
All right. Leslie Sanchez, Ashley Etienne, always great to have you every Friday. Thanks, ladies. Nice weekend.
Thanks.